Welcome to today's Explainer. Now, we're jumping right into the shadows today with a dark, gothic fable. It's the story of a figure we'll just call the architect. Any student of existentialism will tell you that the human condition comes with this terrifying cost of comfort. Today, we're going to look at our own desperate, honestly tragic attempts to avoid the messy, chaotic realities of just being alive. So, dim the lights and let's peer into the abyss together. Okay, starting off with this haunting quote. The architect was a guy who completely believed he was the absolute master of his domain. He thought he was curating this pristine, perfect life, totally sealed away from the unpredictable, corrupting air of surprise. But well, what he thought was mastery, it was really just a voluntary submission to the void. He wasn't conquering life at all. Actually, scratch that. He was actively surrendering to cosmic emptiness. He traded the raw vitality of living for this sterile, lifeless safety. Which brings us to a really crucial question. What exactly happens when a man tries to conquer the chaos of living by perfecting the art of not living? If life is, by its very nature, chaotic, unpredictable, and demanding, what's the psychological toll of just completely walling yourself off from it? The architect tried to escape that messy growth of existence. But in our universe, rejecting chaos doesn't just bring you peace. It summons something much, much darker. And that brings us to the illusion of mastery. So in philology, when we look at the root of the word mastery, magister, meaning chief or teacher, it implies dominion, right? But his dominion was a total lie. He actually looked at his rigid, suffocating cage and called it a throne. He was arranging his days like dead, beautiful insects pinned to a piece of felt. And why? Because he was absolutely terrified. He was running from what philosophers call the terrifying burden of radical freedom. That crushing, absolute responsibility of having to constantly choose, act, and forge your own path in a completely indifferent universe. So let's look at this dichotomy of existence. On one side, you have the architect's curated reality, this safe, flat, horizontal line of identical days. It's the lead of mortality, literally forged from profound existential cowardice. But then on the other side, we have the wanderer. This is a figure who steps boldly into the dark woods of the unknown. They actively embrace that terrifying burden of radical freedom we just talked about. They accept the danger, the pain, and all the chaotic growth that comes with truly existing. Now, retreating from life like the architect did requires what we call an existentialist reversal. It's basically a desperate three-step method to try and hoard the infinite within the finite. First, you flee the terrifying chaos. Then you freeze your fluid life into static intellectual salvage, dried, framed memories completely sealed behind glass. And finally, step 3, you declare yourself a god of definition. He just wanted to be a finished thing, like a completed statue, so he'd never have to face the terror of defining himself through new actions ever again. He sought an impossible finality, essence without existence. In existentialism, there's this unbreakable cosmic law. Existence must always precede essence, right? You live, you act, you stumble, and through all that messy action, you define who you actually are. But the architect, he tried to cheat the universe. By treating his framed memories as his complete, unchangeable identity, he confused the absolute stillness of a finished object with the earned wisdom of a lived life. Basically, he wanted the finality of a god without doing the dirty work of being human. But here's the thing. Time is the ultimate destroyer of illusions. Let's look at this timeline of spiritual entropy. At minute 1, he captures what he thinks are these vibrant stars of memory. But by day 100, the oxygen of time starts to deplete. Because meaning literally requires the oxygen of time, the risk and the loss, to stay alive. By year 5, those vibrant memories are crumbling into gray powder. And by year 10, nothing is left but the literal dust of stagnation. You simply cannot hoard the infinite in an indifferent universe. And this summons the chilling Nietzschean specter of eternal recurrence. Imagine just for a second having to live your exact life over and over for eternity. Now, for the wanderer who embraces growth, this is a joyous challenge. But for the architect, it is an absolute curse. Because his days are perfectly flat and completely identical, he has doomed himself to a horrific eternal recurrence of spiritual death. Every single day is just the exact same loop of gray powder and suffocating dust. So this complete failure of self-mastery breeds some incredibly toxic psychological fallout. Here, we're contrasting the Nietzschean will to power, which is achieving greatness through self-overcoming, with the architect's internal rot. His stagnant energy turns outward into bitter resentment. That French word implies a constant, repetitive refeeling of bitterness. He develops what we call the evil eye, this cynical lens he uses to diminish and mock the raw, unpolished growth of anyone brave enough to actually live. But eventually, the illusion has to fracture. As the architect peers into the mirror of his perfectly constructed reality, a question basically screams at him from the void. What actually lies on the other side of the perfect glass? And that's when the chilling realization dawns on him. His sanctuary was never protecting him from the outside world at all. The horrifying revolution hits him. It's a self-made tomb. He finally wakes up to the grim truth that he is trapped on the wrong side of his own creation. He's not a god, he's not a master. He's literally just a shadow, acting as nothing more than the pathetic guardian of his own stagnation. He built himself a mausoleum, locked the door from the inside, and somehow convinced himself it was paradise. At this point, the illusion is brutally dismantled by three undeniable truths. Let's break them down. First, glass cases suffocate life. They absolutely do not project it. Second, meaning is not some object you can just freeze or possess. And finally, true existence absolutely requires the shattering of perfect order. By fearing the abyss, you're really just aggressively accelerating your own spiritual demise. So how do you survive the void? Well, you have to reject that illusion of comfort and embrace what existentialists call the spirit of becoming. This is the absolute antithesis of the architect's stagnation. It's having the sheer courage to take a hammer to the glass, to accept the terrifying, unpolished uncertainty of the universe, and to truly understand that meaning is an action. It's a verb. It's something you have to forge continuously and painfully in the fires of a completely chaotic reality. I'll leave you with this final, provocative quote. Perform a grave dance over your illusions, for meaning must be continuously, painfully forged. The architect's story is a dark mirror held right up to our own desires for an easy, predictable life. So, you have to ask yourself, are you going to remain pinned to the felt, carefully managing the decay of your own static existence? Or will you find the courage to shatter your glass cases before the void reclaims you entirely?